You know, there's an interesting story in the Bible about how God does unexplainable things. It's the story of Sarah. We see it summarized in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 11, which says, "By faith, even Sarah, who was past childbearing age, was enabled to bear children because she considered him faithful who had made the promise." Now, Sarah wasn't perfect. In fact, we know that even though she had faith and she believed God for the promise, she still took it into her own hands to, well, we might say, help God out with fulfilling that promise, and that didn't go so well. But that's a story for another day. We also see, though, her reaction to God's promise just 1 year before it came true. We're going to pick up the story when Sarah is now 90 years old. This is 25 years after the promise was given. It's found in Genesis 18, verses 10 to 12. Then the Lord said, "I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah, your wife, she will have a son." Now, Sarah was listening like any good woman would, at the entrance to the tent, which was behind him. Abraham and Sarah were already old and well advanced in years, and Sarah was past the age of childbearing. So Sarah laughed to herself as she thought, after I'm worn out and my master is old, will I now have this pleasure? You know what? I can relate to Sarah. I mean, she's got an honest response to what seemed impossible. She laughs and she points out the obvious. I'm worn out and so's the old guy. I mean, she did have a point there. Let me tell you about my Sarah moment. I was washing dishes one day like every good mom does, and my boy comes running in the door between, that door from the garage and simply says, "I'm going to go to church." Well, this is a boy who had run from Jesus for years, hadn't shown up to church for years. So because of my great faith, I opened my mouth and I said, "I'll believe it when I see it." Wow. If that is not a Sarah moment, I mean, if it wasn't for the mercy of God, he should have struck me dead right there and then. But I had prayed for years believing God would go after my kids. And I did believe that God would go after my kids and they would return to Jesus. And now I laugh just when God was about to fulfill his promise. That's my Sarah moment. I bet you've had one too. But you know what's really neat about this passage? Did God rebuke Sarah? Did he rebuke me? Well, let's look at it. The Lord said to Abraham, why did Sarah laugh and say, "Will I really have a child now that I'm old? Is anything too hard for the Lord? I will return to you at the appointed time next year, and Sarah will have a son." Well, Sarah was afraid, so she lied and said, "I didn't laugh," but he said, "Yes, you did." I just love the graciousness of God. Yes, you did. Hear his tone of voice? It's not condemning. It's not shaming her. He didn't say, "Lorie, what's wrong with you already that you said that?" He just graciously understands that we struggle with faith. Notice he simply asked a question. Is anything too hard for God? Well, today, in our many circumstances that seem just way too big for God, God asks you that same question. Is anything too hard for me? We know the answer. Nothing. Nothing is too hard for God. His ways are not our ways, and I can tell you his timing is not our timing. But the way God will work in your life is often unexplainable by any stretch of our imagination. If you could understand God, well, you'd be God, but you're not. So let me give you a little stress reliever. Say this 10 times. God is God, and I am not. That often helps me out. You see, the source of a miracle always comes in unexpected, even unexplainable ways. So what do you do when you're on that road of waiting? Well, you don't fret and fuss. You don't try to figure it out. You just have faith. You trust God. And if God says it, you believe it. And then you get ready for a miracle. And well, keep your laughter for the celebration of that miracle. You see, the very next day after my Sarah moment, my son not only came to church, but he returned to Jesus. God is a God of the unexplainable. So keep trusting him. That's courageous living.